webinar on best and promising practices in integrating reentry and employment interventions. My name is Erica Nelson, and I'm a policy analyst at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. Before we begin, I have a couple of technical notes. If you encounter connection or audio problems during this webinar, please call WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239. This number is also posted to the chat box on your screen. Unfortunately, there are some connection issues that may occur that we may not be able to resolve during this webinar. However, we are recording today's webinar and will post the webinar along with a copy of the slides used in today's presentation onto our website. Everyone who's registered for the webinar will receive an email as soon as the webinar is available on our website. You may also check out our website directly at csgjusticecenter.org/NRRC. At the end of today's webinar, we will have time for questions from the audience. To ask a question, please enter your question into the Q&A panel located in the bottom right corner of your screen. You can ask questions at any point during this webinar, and we'll do our very best to answer as many questions as possible before we end today. Joining me today is James Rhodes, Director of Training and Education at the Lord's Place. The Lord's Place is a nonprofit organization that serves homeless individuals and families in Palm Beach County, Florida, and they've been doing this for over 35 years. We also have Craig Spatera, Criminal Justice Program Manager for Palm Beach County Public Safety Department. Craig develops and oversees reentry initiatives, including the nationally recognized Regional and State Transitional Offender Reentry Program, also known as RESTORE, which you'll hear about today. We also have Chris Warlin, Associate Director for Field Building at Heartland Alliance's National Initiative on Poverty and Economic Opportunity, which includes the National Transitional Jobs Network. Chris supports employment services for chronically unemployed individuals across the country by providing consultation to employment initiatives at local, state, and national levels, and overseeing the development of best practice guides, white papers, and other resources. We also have Ray Woodruff, Employment Programs Manager for Wisconsin Department of Corrections. Ray manages several local and state initiatives aimed at reducing recidivism and improving employment outcomes of individuals who are returning from incarceration into the community. This includes also the Integrated Reentry and Employment Strategies Pilot Project, which we will talk about today. As mentioned, I'm Erica Nelson, and I'm with the Council of State Governments Justice Center. The CSG Justice Center is a national nonprofit organization that provides research-driven strategies and tools to increase public safety and strengthen communities. At the Justice Center, we operate the National Reentry Resource Center, also known as NRRC. The NRRC is funded by the Second Chance Act and overseen by the U.S. Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance. It represents a federal investment of more than $540 million to date in strategies to reduce recidivism, increase public safety, as well as to reduce corrections costs for state and local governments. NRC staff, including myself, provide individualized, intensive, targeted technical assistance, training, distance learning, such as the webinar we have today, to support Second Chance Act grantees maximize their efforts to reduce recidivism, increase public safety, and help people succeed in their communities after incarceration. For today's presentation, we'll provide an overview of the barriers and opportunities for preparing the reentry population to be competitive in today's labor market. We'll also discuss strategies for integrating best and promising reentry and employment practices. Finally, we will discuss establishing a system-wide coordinated reentry process to ensure people returning home from incarceration are connected to the most appropriate reentry and employment services in order to improve recidivism and employment outcomes. So let's get started. We have a quiz for you today. How many adults were under some form of U.S. correctional supervision at year-end 2016? Please enter one response using the polling section located on the lower right side of your screen. You'll have about 5 seconds to enter your answer. A, about 15 million. B, about 5.5 million. C, about 6.7 million. Okay, we'll close the polling at this time. And while my colleague Keisha tallied the results, I think it would be good for us to get a polling of who's in the audience. So if you can see the hand raised next to your name, if you're from a correctional agency, I just ask that you raise your hand now. If you can click the hand raise so we can see how many individuals are here from corrections. Okay, great, awesome. How about from workforce development agencies? So lower your hand if you're from corrections and raise your hand if you're from a workforce development agency. Okay, great. So we actually have the results of the polling in, and we have majority of folks that said 6.7 million, and you're absolutely correct. Federal, state, and local governments are managing large correctional populations. 1 in 36, or 6.7 million people, are under some form of correctional control. And this includes state and federal prisons, local jails, people supervised on community supervision, also known as parole and probation. Of those incarcerated in state prisons, 95% will be released, so a large proportion of people who are going to return home from incarceration. But about 2/3 will be rearrested in 3 years of release, and a little over 80% will return or be rearrested within 9 years of release. Employment is an important factor in successful reentry. It not only creates income for families, but it also creates stronger, positive relationships, opportunities to engage in pro-social activities, and fewer risky activities. And it can also improve mental health. And all these benefits of employment can reduce a person's likelihood of reoffending. And this is especially the case when earnings are above minimum wage and the jobs are stable. Although employment is an important factor for successful reentry, obtaining employment can be difficult for people with criminal records or time spent in prison. There's an extensive body of research that has been established that having a felony conviction or time in prison can make individuals significantly less employable. Now, it's not that the individual who commits the crime are not interested in working, but rather that the felony conviction or time in prison acts independently to lower their employment prospects. Without proper programming while a person is in prison, their employability skills can decline. Also, being incarcerated minimizes a person's access to pro-social networks. Having a criminal record, especially a felony conviction, can create employer biases and legal barriers to employment, such as occupational licensing restrictions. Based on a 2012 survey conducted by the Society of Human Resource Management, 87% of employers conduct background checks of some sort on some applicants or all applicants, which is also can create a barrier to employment. There is no single approach at reducing barriers to employment for people who have criminal records. Our Reentry and Employment Program at the Council of State Governments Justice Center focuses on 3 key areas: building skills necessary to reduce recidivism and obtain and retain employment, engaging employers, and reducing policy barriers. Today we'll talk a great deal about the first pillar that you see towards your left on the screen, building skills, and we'll also touch a little bit on the second pillar, engaging employers. So now let's talk about strategies for integrating best and promising reentry and employment practices. To date, the research on the direct impact of employment on recidivism is mixed. What research has shown us is that job placement alone would not reduce recidivism, that you must address all the underlying needs related to recidivism, and this can include antisocial behaviors and peers that contribute to committing crime, as well as substance addiction, family and marital stressors, lack of pro-social leisure time, lack of employment or education. You may also have to address factors that contribute to stabilization of a person, such as mental health, housing, transportation, and so forth. We also know that not everyone with a criminal record needs the same type of services. Some programming services provided can be beneficial to some, while causing an adverse reaction to others. So agencies should assess a person's level of job readiness and their likelihood for recidivism and provide services and programming that are based on those assessment results. So to that extent, in 2013, the Integrated Reentry and Employment Strategies Framework, or what we call IRIS for short, was published to assist policymakers and practitioners from corrections, reentry, and workforce development agencies to collectively determine how to prioritize resources to improve recidivism and employment outcomes of people returning to communities after incarceration or who are on parole and probation. Also, promising practices for bridging and integrating best practices from corrections and workforce systems. So the IRIS framework is heavily based on risk, need, and responsivity model, or which we call R&R model, which is perhaps the most influential model for assessing and treating offenders. The diagram you see in front of you is actually called the Resource Allocation and Service Matching Tool, which uses a validated criminologic risk and needs assessment along with a job readiness assessment or screening to recommend the delivery of targeted and integrated employment interventions. Because the tool groups people first by risk to reoffend, then by readiness for work, resources can be more effectively focused where they can be more efficient and effective. The Resource Allocation and Service Matching Tool is actually the backbone of the IRIS framework. So let me talk a little bit about this framework so you can get an understanding of how this could help individuals be connected to the most appropriate services. The types of employment interventions that are provided should differ based on a participant's level of job readiness. And I'm going to ask to forward the slide. Great. Employment programs providing services to hard-to-employ populations which have characteristics such as transportation challenges, housing challenges, maybe education and skill defects or health or other needs, which is common amongst individuals with criminal records. These programs should generally aim to achieve two broad goals, either getting folks ready for work or helping them find and retain employment. For people who are more ready for employment, best practices to improve work outcomes include providing services that focus on job development, which is working with local employers to identify job openings, and then job coaching, which is to prepare the participant for their job search process. So this may include helping them develop a resume, search for appropriate jobs, complete a job application. Then we have retention and advancement, and this is actually twofold. You have the participant-facing, which is really to assist them in identifying and addressing problems that may lead to termination of employment, and then working with them to actually obtain higher-paying jobs or more education as they progress in their employment. And then the other side is actually employer-facing, and this is to mitigate any work-related issues and to facilitate opportunities for advancement and to provide ongoing support to employers while the person is actually in the job. And then you can also provide financial work incentives incentives to encourage job retention and advancement. For less job-ready individuals, employment services should focus on soft skill development and supportive services, such as supportive employment services such as transitional jobs, which you'll hear about today. You would also may have to address some non-skill related interventions, and this could be assistance with logistical challenges like housing, clothing, identification, transportation, and child care. Now, the factors that put a person at a higher risk of reoffending can significantly impact their employability. Therefore, beyond what types of services you provide, you may want to also consider how those services are delivered to impact recidivism. This can include efforts in regards to engaging people in programming, the timing of services and incentives provided, coordination with other supports, and the use of structured pro-social activities for people assessed at a higher risk to reoffend. And also they would need maybe some intensive case management, connections to services pre-release or immediately upon release to increase their likelihood of participation. And then the programs should work closely with supervision agents if that person does have one, and other reentry service providers to provide structured structured time and pro-social environment. So let's take a look at what this looked like in practice, because I gave you a lot of information here, and sometimes I find it good for individuals to see what this looks like. So say you're an agency that provides employment services, and I know we had quite a few that raised their hand on the line. You have two individuals that are needing services. Through intake, conducting a risk and needs assessment and a job readiness screening, you discover that their needs differ. So Joseph and Michael is shown in the slide before you. They're about the same age, both have a felony conviction and the same level of education. When assessed for risk, we find that Joseph has no prior convictions, maintained family ties, whereas Michael had 3 prior convictions and a history of substance abuse. Although in a risk and needs assessment will tell you a lot more about a person than what I shared with you just now, we can assume, based on what was shared from these two individuals, that Joseph is at a lower risk to reoffend and Michael is at a higher risk to reoffend. When assessing for job readiness, we discovered that Joseph was employed at the time of arrest and worked in correctional industries while incarcerated, whereas though Michael was unemployed at the time of arrest, has gaps in employment history and has limited skills. Based on the information provided, we can assume that Joseph is more ready for work, whereas though Michael is less ready. For Joseph, services should focus on job attainment and retention, and the intensity of services and supervision should be low. Whereas though for Michael, he will benefit from more intensive engagement, structured programming, and his employment intervention should focus on soft skill development and building job readiness. Michael may benefit from a subsidized employment opportunity such as a transitional job, where he could develop soft skills and receive immediate feedback from his supervisor about his work performance. And with the flexibility of something like a transitional job schedule, Michael can also seek out services for his history of substance addiction if needed. Okay, so now we have a polling question. So I'm asking the group, what are 2 significant barriers to employment facing your clients? Please select 2 from the polling area located at the bottom right hand of your screen. We have A, limited work experience, B, legal barriers to employment, C, lack of occupational skills, D, lack of soft job skills, E, negative attitudes about work. And I'll give everyone about 5 seconds to respond to those questions, and we're going to close it and then tally the results. Okay, we're going to close the polling now, and while we wait to tally the results, there was one group of individuals that I know is on this webinar that we didn't tally. So if you're a community-based organization that provides reentry services, could you just raise your hand? Awesome. Thank you for doing that. All right, we have the results in, and the greatest proportion of individuals mentioned that there's a legal barrier to employment that prevents that person from engaging in work or being given an employment opportunity. And the second response was D, lack of soft skills. So thank you, everyone, for giving us your response. Now I'll turn it over to Chris Warlin with the National Initiatives on Poverty and Economic Opportunity to talk more about integrating best practices from reentry and workforce development to serve people at a higher risk of reoffending and less job ready for work, such as Michael from the example we previously mentioned. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you now. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks very much, Erica, and thanks everybody for tuning in today. I'm Chris. I'm with Heartland Alliance's National Initiatives on Poverty and Economic Opportunity. A little bit about my organization. Heartland Alliance is a large anti-poverty direct service organization based in Chicago. We do a lot of work throughout the Midwest as well as some international programming, and we really provide a wide range of services ranging from housing to healthcare to workforce development for a wide range of populations, including returning citizens, people experiencing homelessness, refugees and immigrants, and many others. So there's a lot of stuff going on at Heartland. The National Initiatives team works in our Research and Policy Department, and we're really focused on connecting chronically unemployed individuals to employment, and doing that through programmatic and best practices assistance, direct assistance to programs through consulting. We are also focused on federal policy solutions to chronic unemployment and poverty, and also we do a lot of partnership with researchers to help inform research and disseminate best practices that are rooted in research, all to the end of connecting more chronically unemployed individuals to employment. And one thing that we do is we run the National Transitional Jobs Network, which is dedicated to promoting and advancing and improving the transitional jobs model to connect people to employment, and that's what I'll be talking about with you today. So we'll just do a little bit of an overview of what the transitional jobs model is. We're also going to talk today a little bit about cognitive behavioral interventions and what we're learning about how transitional employment and cognitive behavioral interventions can work together to reduce recidivism and connect returning citizens to employment. But first we'll talk about TJ. TJ, short for transitional jobs. We define transitional jobs as wage-paid, time-limited work. So this is a little bit different from a temporary job, but it is a time-limited job. So participants will understand that this is not the job that they'll keep forever, but there's a time limit to it. It's subsidized employment that does pay a wage. We think that paying a wage is important to make it a real work experience, and also to help participants to connect to some protections and benefits that are only available to people who are earning wages and paying payroll taxes, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit. In addition to that time-limited wage-paid work experience, a transitional jobs program will provide supportive services to help remove or mitigate barriers to employment, and those support services can range from assistance with transportation and child care and other structural barriers that prevent people from being successful in work, things like providing work clothing or work boots, to interventions like anger management or mental health services or even housing services. So basically customized support services to identify barriers to employment and to help mitigate those barriers. Transitional jobs are also focused on skill development. So that includes both soft skills and specific occupational skills that can be acquired during that work experience. So we want participants to come out of transitional jobs more employable than they were when they began. And then finally, we want transitional jobs, when the wage subsidy begins to come to an end, to connect people to unsubsidized employment through job development services, connections to unsubsidized work, as well as retention services to help participants or program graduates to remain in work and to keep working after that placement. So that's just a quick overview of transitional jobs. There's a lot more information on the transitional jobs model on our website, which I'll share with you toward the end of my segment today. So transitional jobs programs have a number of goals. Connection to unsubsidized employment is a high-level goal, but there are a number of other things that transitional jobs programs aim to accomplish and, in fact, do achieve. It includes stabilizing people with earned income. A lot of the individuals that TJ programs serve are experiencing a good amount of instability in their lives due to a lack of sufficient income and an inability to meet their basic needs. And transitional jobs programs can stabilize people and allow them to receive and participate in other services as a result of that stability. It's also important to note that TJ is all about experiential learning. It's learning how to be a worker by working. And it provides a lot of those unspoken and unwritten lessons about success in work that you really only get as a result of working that first job or being successful for the first time in work. A couple of other things worth noting: transitional jobs programs do really well as establishing a work history, so that somebody who applies for a position in the competitive labor market has a current employer and reference to put on their application or their resume. And establishing that work history is really, really effective in helping people connect to that next job. And then, in addition to that, I mentioned accessing incentives like the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is one of the largest and most important federal anti-poverty programs, but it requires that you earn income and pay payroll taxes in order to access it. There are also a number of things that transitional jobs programs accomplish at the community level and benefit society. We have a measured and documented economic stimulus impact of transitional jobs as people earn income. Particularly low-income individuals tend to spend their earned income right away and spend it locally in communities, and so there is a benefit to local businesses when individuals start earning and spending. People who are employed pay taxes. People who are employed rely less on public benefits, which represents a cost savings. We also know that employers, through survey research that we've done, really benefit and appreciate partnership with transitional jobs programs. And then one thing that I'm sure everyone on this call will be really interested in is we have really strong evidence that transitional jobs programs reduce recidivism among people returning home from incarceration. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And then also, largely as a result of the criminal justice system and corrections cost savings that emerge from reducing recidivism, we have a measured positive return on investment for transitional jobs programs. And TJ programs that serve returning citizens in particular have shown to give back between $1.50 and $4 in public savings for every public dollar that's spent on the intervention. So it is even though it's not a cheap intervention, it is one that tends to pay for itself when you factor in savings in criminal justice costs, in addition to all of those other benefits that we've been able to measure. So It's worth noting that transitional jobs has been extensively studied in a lot of randomized control trials. And that's where we find our evidence supporting our recidivism impacts. In particular, the Center for Employment Opportunities, which is headquartered in New York and has since expanded to a number of other markets, was really instrumental in demonstrating the recidivism impacts of transitional jobs. Interestingly, those recidivism impacts are both robust and long-lasting, meaning that even 3 years after participants exit transitional jobs, there's still measurable recidivism impacts relative to their control group. So pretty significant findings there. Another finding from the research that I think doesn't get enough attention is the fact that transitional jobs programs for returning citizens have really, really high participation rates. In some cases, if we do a really good job of removing barriers and getting people into employment really soon after they return home, we see close to 100% participation rates in transitional jobs programs, which really indicates that returning citizens want to work, they're highly motivated to work, and if you offer a job with low barriers to entry, they will in fact take that job and work. And so very important findings there. Also impacts on child support compliance, which are worth noting. And then in addition to that, we know that TJ programs work better for higher risk individuals. And that's, I think, a real strong argument for effectively targeting this intervention. If somebody doesn't need transitional jobs, then it's important to not enroll them in an intervention that they don't need, particularly one that's kind of expensive, because we know that the individuals who are going to respond best to TJ are those that are at highest risk. So targeting is a really important factor in making sure that you get the most out of your investment in transitional jobs. And then, as I'll talk about in a minute, we're seeing that combining transitional jobs with a cognitive behavioral intervention can be really effective, particularly in reducing violence and violent crime arrests among justice-involved individuals. So I'll talk now a little bit about what I mean when I say cognitive behavioral interventions. It's a therapeutic technique that is also evidence-based. It's an evidence-based practice specifically for reducing recidivism, and there have been a number of studies on the recidivism impacts of cognitive behavioral interventions, including a meta-analysis that showed across all of these studies around a 25% reduction in recidivism as a result of participating in cognitive behavioral therapy. It is a therapeutic technique that really focuses on connecting how feelings, thoughts, and behaviors interrelate, and giving individuals the tools that they need in order to make better decisions that are more aligned with their long-term goals. Which is why we're seeing a particular promise in reducing violence, because it can be a key factor in helping somebody to, in that high-stakes moment when they might engage in violence, to make a different choice, based on the tools that they're provided through cognitive behavioral therapy. We also, in addition to the impacts on recidivism and violence that we've seen, have noted that cognitive behavioral therapy in and of itself can affect employment outcomes through a couple of different mechanisms, but we do see employment impacts from CBT alone. It works in a couple of different ways as far as we can tell, both by reducing anxiety and depression in participants, which then allows them to conduct a more successful job search and be more successful in employment, but also directly affecting some of those same decision-making tools, the same kinds of responses that might result in an act of violence can also result in behaviors that would get you fired from a job. And so those same tools that cognitive behavioral interventions provide can directly affect somebody's success in the workplace as well. And so we see impacts on both accessing employment and retention in employment. So what happens when you put them together? We do have some limited evidence already, and we're involved in a large-scale study here in Chicago to find out more. But there are a number of studies that have been conducted on interventions that combine some kind of transitional job or subsidized income along with a cognitive behavioral intervention, and generally we've seen good results, including one here in Chicago that saw significant reductions in violent crime arrests among young people in high-violence neighborhoods who received both a summer employment opportunity and a cognitive behavioral intervention. And so a good amount of evidence supporting this combination already. And in Chicago, we have a program that is underway now that is being evaluated also through a randomized control trial called READY Chicago. That stands for Rapid Employment and Development Initiative. It's focused on identifying and offering employment services to the Chicagoans who are at absolute highest risk of being involved in gun violence. And it's primarily an anti-violence initiative that uses the transitional job as an engagement strategy, because not a lot of people are going to show up and line up outside your door if you're just offering free cognitive behavioral therapy. But if you offer employment, and then offer the cognitive behavioral intervention in conjunction with that employment, then we're finding that we're able to engage people who would not otherwise seek out services, who don't really even want to be engaged, but who are willing to show up for a job. So we're actively working on really integrating transitional jobs in CBT right now, with a number of other program design features that we think are unique, including extending the transitional job to up to 18 months of subsidized employment, which is a lot longer than most TJ programs. And also, in addition to integrating cognitive behavioral therapy, we're also working in a number of other clinical or therapeutic techniques, including trauma-informed care and harm reduction, in order to really engage and retain some of these individuals in programming who might not automatically be motivated to engage with us. And as I said, we're being evaluated, and so within the next couple of years we'll have impact findings on how good a job we're doing in reducing violence in Chicago with a combination of these techniques. But we're very optimistic, and we have good news so far with regard to our retention numbers. Just kind of further reinforcing that, a lot of people who don't have access or who are disconnected from employment, nevertheless, really, are willing and motivated to work if you're able to offer employment with low barriers to entry. So just a few lessons learned. I know I've gone a couple minutes over my time already, so I'll be brief, but some things that we're learning as we pursue this work. First of all, it's really important to select the right curriculum. Really, all of the curricula available are evidence-based, and what the evidence tells us is that the specific curriculum that you select matters less than the fact that you're following basic CBT principles in your delivery. However, we have found that not a lot of the curricula that we reviewed were really relevant or culturally competent for our specific population. And so, it took some time to identify the right curriculum. And in fact, the curriculum that we did choose, we ended up making some modifications to meet the specific needs and remain relevant for our participants. Also, it can be really logistically challenging to get the transitional work and the cognitive behavioral therapy all to fit into one day. And so there were some scheduling challenges. In our program, we're using a work crew model, so we have a little bit more control over when the work takes place and the number of hours of work per day. But if you're working in conjunction with employer partners, it might be a challenge to find time in the day to offer CBT in addition to enough work hours. Dosage is a real concern, and some of the studies that we've looked at show that you need close to 300 hours of cognitive behavioral therapy in order to really have a reliable impact on justice involvement and violence. And so that's one of the reasons why in Ready Chicago we extended our TJ engagement to 18 months. Because we wanted to make sure that we got our dosage right for CBT so that we could have the violence impacts that we were looking for. And then finally, we found that it worked best for us to provide some compensation as an incentive for participating in CBT. In addition to paying for the work hours, we also offer a stipend to compensate participants for CBT participation, just to make sure that they're not just showing up for work, but they're also showing up for the cognitive behavioral group work. So you might find that that's an important factor for your work as well. I don't really have time. I just have one slide here on trauma-informed care, but just be aware. This is a really, really important factor in all of our work. So pay attention to trauma. Look for the signs of trauma in your participants. And that's it for me. I know I've gone over my time, so I'll just show you that. I can't advance here. This is where you can find more information on our work, our free toolkits and resources, and information specifically on transitional jobs programming. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Chris. And we had just a few questions that came in while you were presenting. One was, where did the Read Chicago get its funds to support the 18-month of transitional work? So what was the funding stream?
It's all private foundation funding. Because Chicago had a spike in violence in 2017, a lot of philanthropic foundations came together and were looking to respond to that spike in violence in a coordinated way. And the way that they decided to address the issue was supporting our work to combine transitional jobs and CBT. And so the idea is that if we can demonstrate the effectiveness and show impact using private dollars, then we will make the case to our city, state, and federal governments that it needs to be publicly funded and replicated in other cities that are experiencing similar problems with violence.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, Chris. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jim Rhodes with the Director of Training and Education at the Lord's Place to discuss strategies for integrating reentry and employment interventions to improve employment outcomes. So Jim, I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Erica. I think I need to put the slide up. So hello everyone, Jim Rhodes here, the Director of Training and Education at the Lord's Place in West Palm Beach, Florida, 1 hour north of the city of Miami. And I have been in education for 33 years, serving as a teacher for 15 years, a middle school principal for 15 years, and an educational consultant for another 3. Primarily, I'll follow up on some things that Chris has said and look more as a case study as I move forward everything. Much of my previous experience in the education sector has prepared me for how I instruct our homeless and formerly incarcerated job training participants. Now, the Lord's Place opened its doors to the homeless 35 years ago as a soup kitchen. Now, realizing that the same clients were showing up day after day, year after year, the agency recognized that it was time to change its focus to breaking the cycle of homelessness by providing supportive housing, then later job training and educational services. Now today, the Lord's Place serves approximately 1,600 clients per year, with nearly 300 enrolling in our employment programs. Now throughout our more than 9 years providing these services, we have found again and again that our most underserved and high barrier clients tended to benefit most from our hands-on apprenticeship programs. Now we call them transitional work experiences. Reentry clients in particular seem to gravitate to these programs. In fact, 57% of our transitional work clients reported being released from incarceration in the previous year. Now, we think the reason that they're drawn to the program is its motivational, team-oriented approach, which helps participants build positive relationships with their peers and enhances their buy-in and commitment to the program. Now, once clients were enrolled in our employment services, they were offered employability skills training classes, job coaching, and opportunities to enter our 2-month apprenticeship programs in either culinary, clerical, or retail. Now, the goal was to assist clients in finding jobs in the community within the second month of training. Now, what we found was that while clients were able to secure employment, a large majority of those who became employed were not able to ultimately sustain it. And this led to some clients returning back to us, or even worse, they recidivated. This increasingly prevalent dilemma led to our program's first real growing pains. To address this challenge, we began to hire students that were doing well in our transitional work experience programs, and consequently, some clients remained with us for up to 2 years or even longer. Now, this became problematic as there became less slots open for new trainees, and we began to unknowingly enable clients to indefinitely avoid external employment. They simply did not want to leave, and in fact, we did not want to lose them. While the intention was good, the program wasn't achieving the intended impact. And as a result, we researched national evidence-based models, which prompted us to change our wage-based employment model back to stipend-based training module, and then to lengthen the program from 2 months up to 9 months. Now, this new approach struck a balance between a program with an indefinite length of time that potentially stifles students' growth and a program that too quickly graduated participants without the skills to sustain employment on a long-term basis. Now, through this new model, clients were now given a transition date to set a goal for them to move on from the program. Clients and supervisors knew up front that they would no longer, they would have an end date after 9 months. Now, we also significantly increased the amount of vocational supervision for our clients received throughout the workday, adding staff to continually provide instruction and correct problematic behavior in real time. Our next challenge was to determine how to fill up the additional time with meaningful curriculum, especially curriculum that would support their employment behavioral transformation, which is so critical to their long-term success. This additional time, or what I like to call hug time, became more meaningful to the clients. I liken the experience this way. While a hug feels good in the moment, it does not last forever. And so what we needed was an intense soft skill training program that would complement their on-the-job training skills. And this, of course, led us to incorporate cognitive behavioral instruction into our model, enabling us to offer evidence-based training as part of our soft skills training curriculum. Now, prior to bringing CBI into our program, we realized that our policy and procedures were largely punitive in nature, and what was missing was intervention. In other words, you can have a 3 strikes and you're out policy, but what happens between strikes to change behaviors? And don't get me wrong, you need to have a strong system of expectations and consequences, but without intervention, behavior changes is very unlikely. So we began our foray into CBI using the curriculum Thinking for a Change, or T4C. We then learned of a more effective intervention called CBI EMP, which is Cognitive Behavioral Intervention Employment, and this was developed by the University of Cincinnati Corrections Institute. Now, the authors of the curriculum, CBI, referred to T4C on steroids, and indeed we agreed at that time. With the commitment of a 6 to 9 month program, we now had the time needed to implement and require CBI as part of our program. So we planned for our clients to attend class twice a week as part of their work schedule, which allowed them to complete CBI within 4 months. This gave clients time in the remainder of their work to practice their new thinking and to get feedback on their performance from their instructors and or the coaches. So we were very encouraged by the latest results. In the 6 months before CBI was implemented, 57% of our clients actually left our program before completion. and yet in the 6 months after CBI was implemented, only 32% left the program before completion. So we were very encouraged about the implementation of CBI. Now, we're still in the 8th month of its initial starting, so much of our results are very encouraging, but yet we still have a lot of way to go. Now, while CBI training was excellent in terms of helping us learn how to teach the program with fidelity, the actual procedural implementation was not well defined. But this is by design, of course, because every agency is different. So what follows is how we implemented CBI employment. First, just because you're trained doesn't mean you're ready to teach a challenging, high-risk reentry client cohort. So to begin the process, we met as an instructor team. We started with 8 and decided as a group how we would maintain the fidelity of the program and manage all the particulars of the program. First, I had the group agree to a co-facilitator model. This helped several things. The co-facilitator group could bounce ideas off each other since their first time presenting can be daunting. Additionally, if someone did need to miss a session, they could rely on each other for support. Now, I also made a point to have one male and one female instructor team, as well as one enthusiastic instructor and one even-toned instructor. I found that the clients were able to attach to one or the other. Next, we decided to have all male and all female cohorts to reflect each group's unique strengths and needs. Motivation for these 32 sessions can be a problem, so we structured it so that the clients were required to attend as part of their work experience. If they failed to show up, they were docked a day's pay. Regarding choosing the right instructors, simply stated, they must be well-versed in their ability to establish trust and rapport with the participants. Now, there is a lot of research to support this key element, but I think this quote sums it up best by James Comer. No significant learning can occur without significant relationship. I mentioned homework and attendance as this must be managed the same across groups, or the clients will begin instructor splitting. I also found that clients really needed to understand the why behind CBI, why practice work is so key to their success. And an integral part of CBI is, in fact, the practice work. Now, Ruby Payne, in her book, A Framework for Understanding, espouses an instructional model that can significantly enhance learning. Now, the model essentially says that the best instruction addresses the what, the why, and the how of the subject matter. So when we look at CBI, what we're saying is that CBI is the what. We know it's very important, but why is it important? Well, if you change your thoughts, you can change your behavior. You can therefore change your life. And the how, the great strength of CBI is they have a number of mental models, if you will, that are practice pieces for the clients, and they use these throughout their training to help them with their thinking in risky situations to choose better ideas. Now, if we agree that clients cannot fix what they do not understand, then we need to teach the why of CBI on a more frequent basis throughout the presentation of CBI. It helps them remain more motivated throughout the program. Now, the particular model that you see in front of you is actually included in the CBI training. And again, this is used to help them understand that behavior is what we see, but it's your thoughts, your feelings, emotions, and beliefs, which are the underpinnings for changing your behavior. So you change your thoughts, you can change your behavior. This is something that they really got the message on, and the motivation really took off from there. So putting this all together, this model demonstrates how a client in traditional work progresses over time in attaining unsubsidized employment. Now, what is significant about this 3-level model is that there is a short waiting period, less than a week. Clients enjoy a sense of motivation as they progress through the 3 levels while earning a progressive stipend. Now, for example, in our culinary program, in the first 3 months, this would be level 1, the clients get a white hat. and they begin their journey into CBI while earning a $100 stipend. In the next 3 months, level 2, the clients are in a blue hat, and the clients rigorously complete performance-based assessments using a rack card format. Now, essentially, the rack card format permits clients an individual approach to accomplishing their skills at their own pace. Each level details specific performance objectives that, once completed, they are signed off on by the instructor. While not the norm, it is possible for a client to complete well ahead of the 6 to 9 months program, just based on their knowledge and their progression and their motivation as they go through the program. Now, in the level 2 program, they are earning a stipend of about $150 per week. Now, in the last 3 months of the transitional work experience, this is level 3, they get to their black hat. Now, their black hat is it's held in high esteem amongst all those that are working. And at this time, they continue working on and honing their skills, but now are focusing on intense job coaching, getting ready to go on to permanent employment. At level 3, they're earning a stipend of $200. And finally, a quick look at preliminary results. July 1, 2016 to June 30, 2017, we saw 24 out of 44 placed into employment, or 55% employment rate. And July 1, 2017 to June 30, 24 clients out of 38 placed into employment were up to 63%. It is really too early for us to report. We're very excited about the results that we're seeing, but again, we've only had CPI in place 8 months, and we are really using our data so that we can see 90 months out, 6 months out, and up to a year, and even 2 years as we move forward this. In summary, I would just add that job is king, and to this end, we've already began researching and implementing additional transitional experiences, including e-commerce, construction, peer advocacy, and maintenance. Well, that's it for me. I thank you all for your time, and I'll certainly be available to answer questions as the program goes on.
All right. Thank you, Jim, for sharing that information and talking about the great work underway at the Lord's Place in Palm Beach County, Florida. Now we have a polling question for the audience. Does your agency offer subsidized employment opportunities? Subsidized employment programs provide jobs for people who cannot find employment in the regular labor market and use public funds to pay all or some of wages. Some of these programs tend to be short-term as a way of earning income. They also are seeking to improve employment outcomes for hard-to-employ populations. Jim and Chris shared with us one form of subsidized employment, transitional work experience, or what we call transitional jobs programs. Other subsidized employment opportunities could include on-the-job training, or what we call OJT, or another type of customized employment training. So if you can please indicate A, if your agency does provide, B, if you do not provide, and C, not provided but interested. And we'll just close the polling in about 3 seconds. Okay, Keisha, we're going to close out the polling and see where we fall in terms of where people are in terms of providing subsidized employment. And while we wait for the results, maybe we can answer a question or two. So this question is for Chris. What types of cognitive behavioral interventions are used as a part of the model you spoke about earlier, the READ model in Chicago? Chris, are you there?
I was muted. Hello. Hi, sorry, I was muted there. As I mentioned before, really the The evidence shows us that, the selection of the curriculum, doesn't necessarily really strongly affect the impacts that you can achieve. But, we did find that, we wanted to take care in selecting a curriculum. And we actually chose two, and we're using both. So, I don't want to necessarily, present this as sort of like the be-all, end-all or, an absolute recommendation for what curriculum would be best for you. But for our purposes, we chose to use the University of Cincinnati CBI curriculum in conjunction with a trauma-informed and substance use-oriented curriculum called Seeking Safety. And so we are using modules from both of those curricula because we found that our participants had a wide range of needs and things that they wanted to address and needed to address in those sessions. And we have made some not modifications to the techniques or the bones of the curriculum, but we've implemented our own sort of examples or illustrative situations to those curricula in order to kind of really reflect the experiences of the participants that we're working with.
All right, thanks, Chris. Thank you for sharing that information. I know we're about 30 minutes out before closing out, so I know we want to keep some time for questions, but I'm excited about us moving into the next portion of the presentation, which is really about how do you ensure people are connected to the most appropriate services in order to improve employment and reentry outcomes on a systems level. So the next two presenters that we have actually are participants of the Integrated Reentry and Employment Strategies pilot project, which I spoke about earlier. Is an assessment-driven referral process to connect people to services. I believe you guys may remember Michael and Joseph, right? So the principles that I talked about are very much evidence-based, but in terms of aligning corrections workforce and community-based agencies on a systems level had not been done prior to the pilot project, which actually started in 2015 in Palm Beach County, Florida, and Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. So it's a 3-year pilot project. The first year we did a lot of data analysis to get an understanding of the systems there and how people are connected to services, what assessments are conducted, when, how, and all that good stuff. And then the second year we actually made some recommendations for a more coordinated process and began working quickly with the sites to implement those recommendations. The third year is actually, we're in the third year, and it includes a process evaluation of both sites to see if the recommendations that were put forth and implemented actually contributed to a more coordinated process. So I'm going to now turn it over to Ray Woodruff with Wisconsin Department of Corrections, which is one of the pilot sites, to talk about his experience in doing this work with the pilot, as well as some of the things that have been implemented as a result of the recommendations that was provided. So Ray, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Erica. As was mentioned, I'm the Employment Programs Manager for the Wisconsin Department of Corrections, and so I oversee various different employment and education-related initiatives throughout the state, one of which is the IRIS pilot project, and I've been involved in the pilot project since the beginning, since early 2015. And I'm glad we're talking about not just the pilot project, but developing a process to adjust how we do business, I guess I would say, to better integrate reentry and employment-related services throughout the state, because obviously with a pilot project you start small and then you learn a great deal, I think, and you try to implement what you've learned to impact the most people possible. So I'll just touch briefly on how the Wisconsin Department of Corrections is set up and then move into how we are taking what we've learned from the IRIS project and implementing it on a large scale to impact as many people as possible. So the Wisconsin Department of Corrections, we operate 37 adult correctional facilities and centers, correctional centers across the state. At any given time, we have around 23 to 24,000 people who are incarcerated in those facilities. I just looked this morning, and it's a little smaller than that number that you see on your screen, but it's pretty close to that. In addition to the people that we house in our correctional institutions, we also oversee individuals on community supervision throughout the state of Wisconsin, and that number is around 65,000 or so individuals who are on community supervision. We also release around 8,500 to 9,000 people every year from our correctional institutions. And in 2017, you see it was closer to 9,000. Roughly 90% of those people are on community supervision after release. And around 30 to 35% of the people that we release in any given year return to one county in the state of Wisconsin, and that's Milwaukee County. And so when we applied for the IRIS project, the IRIS pilot project, we quite naturally focused on Milwaukee County. It's where a lot of individuals are returning post-incarceration, and we have obviously a lot of interest in providing support to those individuals. So we focused on Milwaukee County, and before I get to some of these numbers, I guess I'd say in order to focus on any one area or on any given project, you have to kind of understand what is the landscape of your existing population. In the state of Wisconsin, in the state of Wisconsin Department of Corrections, we have utilized the COMPASS Risk and Needs Assessment Tool for about 8 years now. We've been using that tool, and for those who maybe aren't familiar, COMPASS is a fourth-generation actuarial risk assessment that can provide an indication of how likely someone is to recidivate both generally and violently within the next 2 years after the assessment. In addition to risk, COMPASS also provides information on an individual's level of criminogenic needs, so those issues that, if not addressed, may lead someone back to criminal behavior. And we've been doing that for about 8 years, and every individual who becomes incarcerated in the state of Wisconsin Department of Corrections receives that COMPASS assessment, and we utilize the results of that assessment to inform programming pre-release as well as post-release. And so what we did as part of the IRIS project is we wanted to look at job readiness, because we looked at the tool that Erica described earlier, and while we are looking at risk, and we have been looking at risk, we haven't necessarily looked at job readiness. So we decided to look at, within the COMPASS Risk and Needs tool, we wanted to look at a vocational educational needs scale. And that needs scale essentially assesses the degree of success or failure that an individual may have in areas of work and education, and it can represent a lack of educational or vocational resources on the part of the individual. And so when people score high in that scale, that could indicate a need for additional employability programming, education programming, etc. And that particular scale asks questions like, have you completed high school or your GED? Do you currently have a skill set? If you were to get a job, how likely do you think it would be that you could maintain that job? So a host of questions that try to get at that sort of employability question. And what we found as part of the IRIS project was, of those individuals releasing back to Milwaukee, roughly 50% were in that higher risk, less job ready bucket. You know, and then another 28% or so were in the higher risk, more job ready bucket. So, you know, that indication right there is that we need to have more resources focused on that population, both pre-release, meaning in the Department of Corrections, as well as post-release when we're contracting with community-based providers. And actually what we found as part of the IRIS project was, you know, there's a lot of good work being done in Milwaukee County, a lot of invested agencies and partners who are working with our population. But what we discovered was that a lot of the agencies were actually probably better equipped to serve the lower risk, lower risk, more job-ready population. And so part of the project has been to work with agencies to do some of what Chris was talking about and Jim was talking about, to implement cognitive behavioral elements into their programming to better serve those higher risk clients, which is really where we need to be focusing our resources. So then moving away from the pilot project, I can just say the state of Wisconsin has embraced this strategy wholeheartedly. You know, we have individuals at the highest levels who are invested in integrating reentry and workforce strategies. So the Department of Corrections, prior to 2017, had 5 primary treatment program areas. And this is important just to know that when we have primary treatment program areas, we focus resources in those areas. Inmates understand that this is a priority for them. And historically, we have not focused on employment. We've focused on the things that you can see there, cognitive behavioral, anger management, et cetera. But in order to scale up this IRIS concept and this IRIS strategy, we, as an agency, decided to establish a 6th primary treatment program area, and that is employment. And so in 2017, that was established, and anybody that works for state government or any level of government knows that things like this can take a long time to take shape. The state of Wisconsin, we have over 10,000 employees that work for the Department of Corrections. I mentioned how many inmates and individuals on community supervision we have. So implementing anything of this magnitude takes a long time, but we are making steps to implement this primary program area. And so what we needed to do, once we decided we wanted this primary program area, we needed to establish program standards. And we've done this for all the reasons that you can see there. We want to increase the effectiveness and consistency of the services that we're delivering. We want to consider all the different resources that are going into providing these sort of services, identify risk, needs, responsivity factors related to employment programs. So all of these things come into play when we're talking about a comprehensive strategy. And of course, again, in state government or any level of government, there's lots and lots of policies and procedures that need to be developed. So our goal with the development of the employment program standards was to develop a standardized way of engaging inmates and offenders in employment programming as well as staff, but also, and this is somewhat unique, but to empower local decision-making at our facilities. And by that I mean, again, we have 37 correctional institutions and facilities, and we wanted to empower those institutions to determine what sorts of services locally did they have that could move someone from being less job ready to more job ready, or what sort of services did they have locally that would be more appropriate for lower risk versus higher risk. And this is not something that we've traditionally done in corrections. We have one sort of program that everybody runs, but we know with responsivity we need to be, again, responsive to those things that make us all individuals. So we're in that process right now, where we've established standards, but we're looking at implementation at this point. And so I want to give you an example of the employment program standards using the IRIS framework for a specific employment program. We have many programs in the Department of Corrections that I think would fit under the header of an employment readiness program. And so we wanted to account for all of these different things. So one of our programs is called Windows to Work. This program we contract with local workforce development boards throughout the state of Wisconsin to provide a pre- and post-release program for our inmate population. This program includes cognitive behavioral interventions, financial literacy, employment readiness programming, all pre-release. And then post-release, it's a lot of job development and coaching, potentially some transitional subsidized employment, a lot of connection to employment. So the target population for this program pre-release is those moderate to high risk individuals who are less job ready. But for me, job readiness exists on a continuum, so people move from less job ready to more job ready. And when they become more job ready, we don't want to just kick them out of a program. So Windows to Work accounts for that sort of transitional phase where the services can change. The program begins 3 to 9 months prior to release and continues 12 months post-release. And so in our employment standards, we accounted for all of those employment program components that we talked about earlier. soft cognitive skill development is included as a part of Windows to Work, and then we describe that in our policies and procedures. We also accounted for all the employment service delivery principles when we created the standards, because this is what we provide to our staff. So, for instance, timing. We talk about the timing. Pre-release curriculum is delivered for approximately 1.5 hours, twice per week. We use the CBI EMP curriculum that Jim and Chris have talked about. So, we wanted to account for all of these elements that we've already talked about, that Erica's already talked about, in providing a framework that we can serve clients pre-release. Because a big part of the IRIS project was looking at that post-release phase, but what we discovered at Wisconsin, and Craig can talk about the difference down in Florida, but in Wisconsin, we really wanted to embrace that pre-release phase. And from my perspective, there was no reason that we couldn't back it up as far as possible to begin working with clients so that they could become job ready prior to getting out to the community. We all know that there's a lot of things that you can work on with them in the community, but we thought that there's a lot we could do prior to release. And we had the resources and we have the staff, and we wanted to apply this framework to better serve our clients. So there's been a lot going on in the Wisconsin Department of Corrections with applying this framework and creating a set of standards that we can use our risk and needs assessment to create referrals inside the institutions, whether that be in Windows to Work, for instance, or whether that just be in inmate jobs. We have a lot of inmate jobs, and how do inmates get these jobs? That's something we're looking at. Do they have to apply through the application process? Is there an interview? How often is someone reviewed while they're working as a janitor in a housing unit? So all of these things come into play when you're looking at creating a structure or a framework to integrate these different strategies. And by no means are we're done with our work. We have a lot of work left to do, but we've taken a lot of steps to integrate these services. And through partnerships, tremendous partnerships with workforce development boards, community-based providers, I think we're on a good path going forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ray, for sharing that information and talking about the great work that's underway at Wisconsin Department of Corrections, and how you all as an agency are developing a systematic process for connecting people to the most appropriate employment interventions. So I know we have like about 15 minutes left in the presentation, and we want to allow a few minutes for questions, but I do want to give an opportunity for our other pilot site, which Craig Spatera leads up in Palm Beach County, Florida, to talk about how they've developed a systematic approach to connecting people to services based on assessment results. So I'll turn it over to Craig to share a little bit about what's happening in Palm Beach as a part of their Restore model, as well as their participation in the IRIS project.
Thanks, Erica. Again, I'm Craig Spatera with the Palm Beach County Public Safety Department. Happy to be here. I'm going to get through these slides a lot quicker than I initially thought, so bear with me. I hope we don't miss anything. I'm going to talk about how Palm Beach County established our local network of reentry services that really laid the groundwork for our community-based model and the IRIS pilot project. There were a lot of key developments in the county that took place, and every single one of them required collaboration with an outside agency or multiple agencies. No one agency could have done this alone, and I'll briefly hit on really the highlights of what these key developments were. Initially, the Palm Beach County Criminal Justice Commission, which is the local coordinating council for criminal justice, named offender reentry as a priority, and they redirected a small amount of local county funding so we could get started. And it's really a public-private partnership between the county and the Economic Council of Palm Beach. What the CJC did, it really promotes collaboration among service providers, and it really acted as an umbrella organization when it comes to reentry. It brought together the Department of Corrections, the local jail, our local government agencies, and community-based stakeholders, all to focus on one mission. So we established our reentry task force. You can see the structure here. And this really just provides a formal structure to address policy and funding decisions within our county. We are an advisory board to the Board of County Commissioners, and we look at housing, data and evaluation, employment. We have a juvenile subcommittee, sex offender subcommittee, and the sustainability subcommittee. And all of them really focus on those areas and report back up to the full task force and then to the Board of County Commissioners. The first thing that this task force did, the first step was it was in 2009, we created an inventory of the county services and identified gaps and challenges around county reentry services. And we found that we had geographical issues because our county is so big. It's the largest county east of the Mississippi. We were lacking in coordination. Everybody was just doing their own thing, and we had a systemic problem because we were unable to have pre-release contact with the clients returning. So one of the things that we intentionally set out to do was create a community-based model. We feel that reentry services are a social service, and we treat them as such, so we left the work up to the experts, to the nonprofit groups that provide these social services. And we meet with all of these organizations. We meet with the staff who are doing the work on the ground monthly, and we were really able to build this program through those meetings, listening to the folks who were doing the work, and it was built from the ground up, not the top down. Some things that helped us along the way were formalizing our policies. Again, once we got started, we were really unfocused, and we had a technical assistance visit from the Council of State Government who really helped us formalize what we were doing, and once we wrote it down, things finally fell in line. We adopted a standardized assessment as a county. We used the level of service inventory revised, or the LSIR, to assess criminogenic risk and needs. And we identify strategies to engage people prior to release. So we have 4 points of entry into our program. The Sagopalm Reentry Center, which is our most effective model, we have pre-release contact for up to 3 years prior to our client's release. We have staff that go out there and work with these clients 3 years before they're released. And that program produces the best results. It is a Department of Corrections facility. We work with all the other facilities coming back, all the other facilities in the state of Florida. We work with juveniles returning from residential commitment, and then we have in-reach at the Palm Beach County local jail as well. So here's just another diagram of the 4 entry points, and we, again, all the referrals come to us, the Palm Beach County Public Safety Department. The Criminal Justice Commission started this initiative as a pilot, and then we moved to the Public Safety Department within the county and really found a permanent home. And I think you all are familiar with the reentry services here. These are the services that we offer on the left here, the program components. One of the things that makes us unique is we created a database that it's web-based, and it also tracks recidivism for us. If our client, we put a client in our database, and every night it's run up against the sheriff's booking blotter, and it's automated. So if one of our clients is rearrested, we get an email the next morning saying John Smith was rearrested, and we're able to track our success that way. It's web-based. All of the providers use this system in Palm Beach County that we fund. Information really flows from assessment, consistent information flows from assessment to planning to execution of services. And some of the challenges we had along the way were really with the in-reach that we do, custody and control issues versus social service issues. It was new for the Department of Corrections and the local jail to let folks in and sort of look at things a different way. The Department of Corrections admitted that there was a problem and they wanted to try something different, so we were able to engage pre-release in that way. There was really a language barrier between the Department of Corrections, the community-based organizations, and the local government here. We were all speaking a different language, so we really sat down and created a common language so we were all on the same page. And there were turf issues between the nonprofits that we partner with. we were able to work through those issues, and now everybody is at the same table, and we really are stronger together. We've been able to obtain $5.5 million in competitive grants as a collaborative. Again, one of the other foundations that helped us build to get to this point were, letting outside organizations come in. A lot of folks are hesitant to open up their books and their processes to outside agencies, but that was really a key to how we were able to improve and continue to build and get better. Council of State Governments was a great resource. Heartland Alliance, we took a trip to Milwaukee. Basically, we never missed an opportunity to let someone come in and give us advice and to keep learning. I'm moving through this in a hurry. I got another minute and I'll be finished. Okay, with funding, we are funding by these sources. The JAG funds were redirected through the Criminal Justice Commission. We have law enforcement trust funds, which are forfeiture dollars. We get local ad valorem dollars, and we had some dollars for the MacArthur Foundation. And it all began with competitive grants. So this was really the first grant program that I've seen that was able to work correctly. It started out with grant funding, and then it was sustained with local ad valorem tax dollars. It's still not enough. We have a long way to go, but we're happy with how far we've been able to come. Our results, we've been able to cut one-year recidivism rates in half compared to baseline rearrest rates. And this is what we are most proud of. This is the bottom line. We are getting results. We've cut recidivism rates for those involved in our program that were released from the Department of Corrections in half, and the local jail as well. And lastly, I would like to just invite all of you to come down to Palm Beach County. We're having a National Reentry Conference October 3rd through the 5th. The website information is there, the www.reentrysummitpbc.com. And we'd love for you to come down. A lot of the people on this webinar will be presenting, and there are limited seats for a national discussion around reentry, and we'd love to have you. And I'll turn it back over to Erica.
All right. Thank you so much, Craig, for sharing that information about the great work happening in Palm Beach County. I now want to take some questions from the audience, but as you see, all our contact information is listed here, so if there was something very specific, whether it was a copy of a policy or a particular implementation plan or something that you feel as though your agency could benefit from, please feel free to reach out, email, and we'll try our best to make sure that we can share that information with you all. We had a lot of information shared today, and it came from various perspectives and at different levels, but it shows you the importance of employment for the reentry population. You've seen what's happened at the Department of Corrections, what is happening on a community level, what is happening within a systematic local level. So all these entities are really working towards improving employment and recidivism outcomes for those who are impacted by the criminal justice system. So I noticed a few questions. One is a question that we often get from the field, especially with the IRIS framework, and the ask about using a job readiness or assessment tool. I believe Ray shared with you earlier that they use their risk and needs assessment. It has an employment, vocation, domain, as well as a employment problem scale. So that's kind of what they use pre-release. But they also work with the local board, the board in Milwaukee County, and they've been implementing what they call the online work readiness assessment, or it's also called the ORA. It actually was developed by Department of Health and Human Resources, U.S. Department of Health and Human Resources, in partnership with ICF. And that's one tool that they've used, and they've customized it to serve their agency. And any of the assessment tools that you use, whether it's for a risk and needs assessment or for assessing job readiness, you kind of need to take in consideration whether the needs of your agencies that are providing the services and what you want to assess for and what is comparable to the processes within your agency. So cost, whether it's paper, whether it's electronic-based, all those things should be taken in consideration. Craig, do you want to share a little bit about your experience with the pilot and kind of selecting a job readiness tool?
It was painful. It took years. We looked at multiple tools and found that some duplicated what was already in our database, so we created a checklist. It's a readiness checklist that really determines if clients are more or less ready for employment, and we use that right now to put them into, we pair that with their risk assessment and then point them in the right direction for employment.
Yeah, thank you, Craig, for sharing that. So there's a number of different ways. As a former workforce development practitioner, we often layered assessments, and we would have generalized assessments to determine someone's skill sets, but then also we wanted to engage them on potential barriers to employment, so we would ask questions specifically about that. It's not as black and white as risk and needs assessments. Like risk and needs assessments, you have 8 criminogenic risk needs domains. Most assessments that have been validated test for those areas. With job readiness assessments, you have to do a little bit digging and, like Craig said, kind of identify one that's suitable for your agency and doesn't duplicate already assessment points. Another question that came from the audience was about engaging people in programming. So oftentimes we know that people need time to develop job readiness skills or soft skills, but they're kind of pressured to find employment. I wanted to open it up to one of our panelists to talk about, maybe what are some strategies that you guys utilize to kind of help them in terms of building the soft skills while they also are trying to find employment. And I would say one of the things that we did talk about was the transitional jobs opportunities. So sometimes subsidized employment can assist with that. TJ programs can provide soft skill development like Chris mentioned, and you can offer a subsidy for it so that person could earn a wage while participating in the TJ program. So that could be an opportunity there as well. And I'll take just one more question. I know we're a little over time and I don't want to keep everyone. Another one was about the financial education is included in the Windows to Work program.
Yep. This is
Ray. Is financial education included?
Yep. Yeah. So we include financial education. I did see that question. We're actually currently in the process of looking at the financial portion of the program because with responsivity, we have varying needs levels associated with financial education, and some people have had a home and they've had a mortgage, and others have never had a bank account. So accounting for those differences can sometimes be difficult, but yes, we absolutely provide financial education as part of Windows to Work.
Awesome. All right, so as mentioned, if you have a specific question, please feel free to give us an email. We could share resources. A copy of this presentation will be posted on the NRC website, so that it will be available for downloading and use. You'll also receive an email with the links as well, so you'll get that. And just here is a few resources that you may find helpful, many of which we've talked about today. I know someone mentioned that the toolkit for the NTJN or National Transitional Jobs Network, they were having a little bit of difficulty finding. This website should lead you there. There may be some issues with the actual website, but we'll work with Chris to make certain that the website is accessible and that you can view the toolkit there. So that concludes today's webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope you found the information helpful, and we'll go back to your jurisdictions with true action steps on how you could increase employment outcomes while reducing recidivism for those who are returning from incarceration. Thank you, and have a great day.